May 24, 1883, Toledo Blade, Toledo, Ohio. Oscar Wilde in the Unutterable Wheel. Paris letter in the Chicago Tribune. You must have found yourself very little in sympathy with America and Americans, surely, I remarked. Oh no, condescendingly replied the generous Oscar. I feel an interest in all humanity. Even in Chicago, I found much of intensest interest. Beauties, wonderful beauties. One day, as I adjourned in that city, I came upon the waterworks, a sort of castellated atrocity, with pepper-box turrets and absurd portcullises. How came they, thought I with amazement, how came they to erect this hideous building in this most modern and utilitarian of cities? I must have a closer look at this horror. Perchance I shall find some beauty even here, I murmured, for we cannot live without beauty, you know. We can do without food and things of that sort, but not without beauty. Then it occurred to me that perhaps I might discover this beauty I had sought for in vain so long in American machinery. A wheel is in itself a very beautiful object. All the noblest forms of the ceramic art are derived from the potter's wheel. And yet in England I had always found machinery such a pitiful and ugly thing, a jumble of cranks and cogs and petty pieces, you know, without a touch of grandeur about them. So I entered the castellated horror at Chicago, and there at last I came upon a wheel, the wheel of the Chicago waterworks, a mighty, majestic, unutterably harmonious wheel. I saw the beauty and the poetry of America in that revolving wonder, and I said to myself, if ever America produces a great musician, let him write a machinery symphony. He could have no more worthy subject. But of course, they never will have a great musician out there, continued Oscar, dropping from the clouds to earth with a singular suddenness, until they have abolished the shrieking steam whistle. Their tympanums have all been ruined by those whistles. November 28, 1898, The Day, New London, Connecticut. Plagiarism of Milton. Another charge that the great poet borrowed material for his Paradise Lost. The translation into English of the Dutch drama of Lucifer by Wilde, the greatest of Dutch poets, just issued in New York City, reveals a startling analogy to Milton's Paradise Lost and throws a strong suspicion of plagiarism on one of the greatest of English poets. Not only are many words and phrases similar, but the whole plot and scheme of the poems are similar. The Dutch drama of Lucifer was published 13 years before Milton put forth his Paradise Lost, and it is known that Milton read Dutch and was familiar with Wilde's writings. The only possible inference is that Milton borrowed from the Dutch poet and sought to justify himself for this act when he wrote what has ever since been the plagiarist's apology. To borrow and to better in the borrowing is no plagiary. The author of the translation of Lucifer makes no argument to prove that Milton derived his ideas from it, but simply gives a list of parallelisms by which anyone can satisfy himself on that subject. June 10, 1908, the St. Petersburg Times, St. Petersburg, Florida. Man Without a Soul. The Uncanny Creation of Mary Godwin Shelley. Monster of Frankenstein. The interesting history of an earlier day novel that is frequently alluded to in literature and at times quoted incorrectly. Everybody, or nearly everybody, has heard of the novel of Frankenstein, though it is not probable that many persons read it nowadays. There are so many allusions to it in our literature, however, that one absorbs some sort of notion of it so that he cannot help knowing that it is a weird and ghastly story about a monster, But whether or not Frankenstein is the monster, even well-informed people do not always know, showing that they never read the story. Sometimes we hear allusions to Frankenstein's monster, as in one of Charles Sumner's orations, where he speaks of the soulless monster of Frankenstein, the wretched creation of mortal science without God, and sometimes the reference is to Frankenstein only, as if he were the monster. Of course, Sumner, who was very particular in his use of figures of speech, was right. When Mrs. Deland in her novel of Sidney makes Major Lee say that Christianity is a Frankenstein, she suffers the Major to talk nonsense. The story of this weird novel and the circumstances under which it came to be written are decidedly interesting and may be told in a few words. The facts are as follows. In 1816, Mary Godwin, afterward Mrs. Shelley, eloped with Shelley, and they took up their residence near Geneva in Switzerland. They had Lord Byron for a neighbor, and the three passed much time together. Their conversation frequently ran on the occult and the mysterious, and Byron one day proposed that each should write a ghost story. All agreed and went to work, but it was not long before the two poets gave it up as a hopeless task. They could write poetry, but they could not write stories. Mary persevered and completed her tale in the spring of 1817. When Byron and Shelley heard it read, they were surprised and delighted. It was bound to be the novel of the century. The name of it was Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus. It was immediately sent to London for publication and met with a great success. Frankenstein is a Swiss youth, a student at the University of Ingolstadt, deeply interested in the study of chemistry and natural philosophy. He resolves to penetrate the mysteries of life and death and wrest from nature the secret of creation. After prolonged study, he succeeds and discovers how to impart movement and animation to lifeless matter. He then resolves to mold a colossal man, making him beautiful in form and feature, and imbue him with life. He carries on his work in a studio far from the habitations of man, labors long and secretly, and at last the work is completed. There in the great room lies the form and semblance of a human being, perfect in all his proportions. Frankenstein relates the story. It was on a dreary night in November that I beheld the accomplishment of my tolls. With an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, I collected the instruments of life around me that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing that lay at my feet. It was already 1 o'clock in the morning. The rain pattered dismally against the window panes, and my candle was nearly burned out when, by the glimmer of the half-extinguished light, I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open. It breathed hard, and a convulsive motion agitated its limbs. Slowly the immense creature arose, and the artist, frightened at his own work, fled away. Then he returns to find his creation possessed of life and every attribute of humanity except a soul. Nowhere can it find human sympathy. It is out of harmony with all things about it, and after searching the world in pursuit of happiness, it returns again to Frankenstein and demands that he make a companion with whom it can live in sympathy and love. Frankenstein declines, and thenceforth the monster pursues him with hatred and revenge. It slays his brothers and sister, his friend and his bride. It follows him to Russia, to Siberia, and into the Arctic Ocean, and there creature and artist perish together. It is a most uncanny story to read at night. Sir Walter Scott reviewed the novel in the Quarterly, but, while admitting its power, confessed he did not like it. Our taste and our judgment revolt at this kind of writing. All the critics agreed as to its daring originality.